Hi, I'm Steve Gavatorta, and today we're going to talk about the second step you learn in the Dynamic Communication Workshop. If you remember, step one is basically learning the 4 styles, and in the workshop you were able to learn your respective style. Today, we're going to teach you the skill set of reading the styles of those people with whom you interact with on a daily basis. And within the read step, there are 3 steps. The first is identifying the primary read of that person with whom you're interacting with. So the primary read consists of the descriptors that describe that person and how they align under each of the DISC behavior or communication styles, and then the 3 indicators as well. So as example, dominant styles, words to describe them again are aggressive, forceful, decisive. Influencing styles are gregarious, talkative, outgoing. And steadiness styles are very modest, relaxed, and steady in their approach. And lastly, compliance styles are very analytical, contemplative, and exacting. So if I'm interfacing with someone for the first time, I'm looking at words to describe them and how those words fall into those 4 descriptors I just provided for the 4 DISC styles. So if someone's very talkative, outgoing, gregarious, I'm going to start thinking they sound like an I or influencing based style. That's identifying the primary read through the descriptors. The second part of the primary read is also looking at the 3 indicators we discussed. If you remember from the workshop, indicator 1 is going to ask, is that style more introverted or extroverted? And if you remember, dominant styles and influencing styles are more extroverted, whereas steadiness and compliance styles are much more introverted. Indicator 2 is going to ask, is that style more task-oriented or people-oriented? And remember, dominant styles and compliance styles are much more task-oriented, whereas influencing and steadiness styles are much more people-oriented. And then lastly, the third indicator is going to ask, is that style more direct in their communication style or indirect? And again, dominant styles and compliance styles are much more direct. And again, influencing and steadiness styles are much more indirect in their communication. So if I'm interfacing with someone for the first time, I'm going to look at words that describe them and where those words fall in the 4 DISC behavioral buckets, and then walk through the 3 indicators and see how those fall out. And by following that process, you're going to be able to get a good snapshot on what that person's DISC behavioral or communication style is. The second step in reading styles focuses on what I call the secondary read. The secondary read focuses on how the 4 styles deal with change, risk-taking, and conflict. So if I'm interfacing with someone and I can read how they deal with change or risk-taking or conflict, it's going to enable me to better bucket where they may fall within the 4 DISC behavior or communication styles. So in reviewing the 4 styles, dominant styles love change, they're very high risk takers, and their conflict response is basically to fight back. Influence styles, really change depends on people. If change and risk-taking benefit people, they'll be more apt to make that change or take that risk. If it harms people, less so. And their conflict response is to basically run or flight. They do not like to engage in conflict. The steadiness styles, they don't like change. They essentially need time to prepare for that change, and they're very low risk takers. And with regard to conflict, they'll tend to tolerate it. And then lastly, the compliant or conscientious style is really concerned about the effects of change, and they as well are very low risk takers. And their conflict response is basically to avoid it. They'll be direct in their approach, but they're not going to seek a conflict. Now lastly, the third step in reading styles. We talked about primary read, secondary read. The third step is basically to take what you captured in the primary and secondary reads to make a conclusion as to what that person's DISC behavior or communication style is. So that's the step in reading styles. Now in the next video, we'll talk about adapting styles for effective communication.